Welcome back to Landlines. I'm your host, Leslie Volker. In this episode, I traveled to Pueblo, Colorado, to the home of Dr. Henry Pollock and Dr. Judith Westveer, the executive and associate directors of Southern Plains Land Trust. Southern Plains Land Trust, which you'll hear us abbreviate as SPLT, has a mission to preserve and protect shortgrass prairie. SPLT owns and manages land in Bent, Baca, and Prowers counties in southeastern Colorado. They partner with Colorado Open Lands to permanently protect their land holdings through conservation easements to the tune of over 50,000 acres conserved. We discussed how our partnership works, what's special about the shortgrass prairie, the history of Colorado's plains, and what secrets they reveal when one takes the time to observe. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to Landlines.
Thank you for having us.
Great to be here.
So to get started, I would love to hear a little bit about Southern Plains Land Trust mission. Could you just give me an overview of that, please?
It is Southern Plains Land Trust's mission to protect a network of prairie refuges for prairie wildlife. So we're specifically focused on helping native prairie wildlife, animals and plants to have a safe space.
And how long has it been in operation?
We were founded in 1998, so it's been 27 years.
Wow, great. And then how did you two find yourselves there?
It's a long story. How much time do you have?
We got about an hour.
Great. Judith and I met in Peru, actually, both working for respective NGOs on tropical conservation. We still have an abiding love for tropical rainforests. So it's funny that we ended up in the grasslands of Southeast Colorado. But we actually got partner hired together by the Southern Plains Land Trust in 2023 and have been there for a little over 2 years. And I have to admit, it's one of the best jobs I've ever had. And I really love what we're doing here. You know, protecting land in perpetuity feels really important. So,
yeah. And can you tell me a little bit about your personal backgrounds, like your educational or career path, or just, how did we get here today?
Yeah, well, both Henry and I are conservation ecologists, different specific taxa, but I have a PhD in stream restoration from the University of Amsterdam. So I got trained to, restore all sorts of streams with all sorts of activities. And Henry?
I got my PhD from the University of Illinois in 2016 in the program for conservation, biology, evolution, and ecology. And I studied tropical birds in Panama for 5.5 years. And then I lived in Guam for 2 years working on endangered bird species there that were being impacted by the brown tree snake, then came back to the U.S. So it was a long circuitous route. And then eventually, as I mentioned, started at SPLT in 2023. So.
Okay. And you two met somewhere along the way, married, and partner hire is a term I haven't heard before. Can you explain that for me?
I think it's a distinctly academic term. You hear it a lot in the academic world, which is when two people, academics, are trying to get a job at the same institution, which is often quite challenging for obvious reasons. So, I was offered a job, and it is an extremely remote area. If you've ever been out to Heartland Ranch or any of SPLT's preserves, it's quite off the beaten path. And so, I initially inquired, is there a possibility to also hire my partner, who is also a brilliant ecologist, and, probably there's not going to be a lot of other applicable jobs in the area. So luckily it worked out, and that's how we ended up at SPLT.
Yeah, and I'm happy that worked out, because oftentimes I would be out there on the ranch and I could not have imagined working another job than for Southern Plains Land Trust.
It would have been challenging.
Yeah, because we were welcoming people into our home, onto the Heartland Ranch house all the time. So I'm just happy that things worked out as like a partner hire for us.
And I'll follow up with our entire social milieu at the ranch was Jay Touchton, who is our former preserve manager, still a really good friend. But it was I think it was good to have something to share together. I think sometimes there can be challenges when you're working with a partner, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think when we initially went into the situation, we were a little bit wary about how is this going to all play out. But I think we work really well together. We sort of have complementary skills and often operate in different spaces within the organization. So I think that's actually worked out quite well.
Yeah. And you're both so eminently qualified for this job. It's I'm so happy that it worked out the way that it did for all parties.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about Heartland Ranch or your network of preserves before we dive into kind of the nuts and bolts of shortgrass prairie protection. Can you describe for me, so Heartland Ranch is the big one, right? And most of them are contiguous to that, or everything is a part of Heartland now, or almost?
We now have 4 different preserves.
Okay.
There is some space between those preserves, but they are located all in Bend, Baca, and Prowers County. So they are separate, but close together.
Okay. And then describe for our listeners, where are those counties?
We operate in the far southeast corner of Colorado. So Baca County and Prowers County border Kansas and New Mexico, for example. Bent County is just a little bit farther west and north. So really the bottom corner of the state. And it's pure prairie, pure grasslands, part of the state that a lot of people often don't get to. So
right. I can imagine very low population, probably not a lot of passable roads, like ways in and out. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. I would say that when you're out on the prairie, you always have to be cognizant of the weather. If you have a rainstorm out there, the roads turn to mush. So definitely some challenges with living out there. Low population density. There's not a lot of infrastructure out there.
So Bent, Baca, and Prowers counties, describe the landscape there. What are the natural features? What's there and what isn't?
It's very flat. When you first see it, but when you're actually on the ground, you'll see lots of creeks, little cliffs. There are these things they used to call bison jumps. That's a whole historical feature. So there's lots of diversity once you're on the ground. It just looks very flat from the highway or when you fly over it. That's why they used to call it flyover country, right?
I think they still do in some
They still do? Well, the lovers of shortgrass prairie, they should definitely visit. What are other features? Well, we've got a lot of native grasses. We've got a lot of native wildlife on our preserves. So that's the pronghorn, mule deer, white-tailed deer. But we also introduced bison, and there's lots of other biodiversity that just like immediately meets the eye. I always make fun of Henry because he's like, I love it here. There's so much megafauna, and he doesn't mean cattle. It's like native megafauna. But I love the small creatures. So lots of insects, lots of like little ground squirrels, prairie dogs, a lot of birds as well.
So if you're just looking out, from the highway, you might not be seeing much, but there's a lot going on.
Exactly. You just need to be like walking through it.
Yeah. So what is the strict definition of shortgrass prairie?
Yeah, so prairie is a broad term that encompasses a lot of different subtypes of grassland. There's a lot of variation encompassed within that term. The 3 sort of macro types of prairie are tallgrass prairie, mixed grass, and shortgrass. And tallgrass prairie it's all based on precipitation. The farther east you are and the more rain that your land is getting, the higher your grass is going to grow, the more productive your soil is going to be. So that's like the tallgrass prairie that you'd find in Illinois, that used to be in Iowa, places like that. As you get farther west, there's sort of a transition zone and you get into mixed grass prairie in Kansas and the panhandle of Oklahoma. That's kind of a combination of different species. That's also sort of an intermediate precipitation range. And when you get into the shortgrass, it's the driest part of the prairie of the Great Plains. So where we're at in Bent County, our average precipitation is about 12 to 13 inches a year. So it's extremely dry. It's sort of marginal, it's almost desert really. Yeah. So it's all based on precipitation, and that precipitation in turn, when combining with the soil and a few other environmental factors, will determine those specific plant communities that inhabit those types of prairie. Obviously, in the shortgrass, you have shorter species. The 2 main species in shortgrass prairie, they're sort of the bread and butter of shortgrass prairie, are buffalo grass and blue grama. But there's also a lot of other diversity out there that it is often less abundant, but all the more reason to appreciate it.
Backing up a little bit, when people think about Colorado, they think about the Rocky Mountains. And personal pet peeve as a marketing person, every business in Colorado or in Denver, at least, their logo is mountains, whether they're, a plumber, a print shop, anything, drives me a little bit nuts. How much of Colorado is prairie? It's got to be a huge portion, right?
A lot. It's more than a third of the state at a conservative estimate. And I think, to give you an anecdote, there was a guy who came out to Heartland last year who had lived in Colorado for 40 years. And he said, this is the first time I've ever really spent time on the prairie. And I think that really is a microcosm of how people view Colorado and how people recreate in Colorado too. I mean, we have some of the most beautiful areas, the Comanche National Grassland. There's just some incredible ecological resources there, some of the oldest and largest dinosaur tracks in the world there. The list goes on, but oftentimes I feel like it's an underutilized resource precisely for that reason.
Yeah. I mean, I've driven to points far east on I-70, and once you're out of Denver, I mean, it is flat. So I think people, it's just not top of mind. Like, you don't think of it as an iconic piece of Colorado, but if it's a third of the landmass, there's a lot going on there. And I think it deserves a little bit more attention, and presumably you two do as well.
Indeed.
There are just no large cities on the plains, low population density. It's definitely the poorer counties. So I think a lot of people just don't see it as something that they are excited to visit.
And I think we hope to change that. I think in our mission at Split, we're hoping to let people on to the secret that is Southeast Colorado.
Yeah. Well, we're excited about it, people in this room. And I would love to just ask you that question. What lights you up about it? What's special about the shortgrass prairie?
Well, for me, it's the elements. When we first moved out there, it was just it's so vast. So you see a lot of the sky as well.
Yeah.
So when we first arrived, we immediately had an amazing sunset, like the biggest orange sky that you could ever see. The thunderstorms, like to see the lightning from that distance is incredible.
Wow.
Rainbows during monsoon season. Just like double rainbows, triple rainbows, the storms. It's just the feeling of being so close to the sky is amazing.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's the subtle beauty that is often the aspect of the prairie that people don't realize exists. As Judith mentioned, when you're looking out at a prairie landscape, it's incredibly flat. It doesn't look that compelling. When you get out there in the midst of it and you start to see all the subtle beauty, and Judith alluded to some of those things, I think that's really powerful. And I think that is why our goal at Split is to try to get as many people as we can out to Heartland and our other preserves to share that beauty with them, to give them a sense of place and to increase the scope of our mission.
Yeah. And great segue. Speaking of scope, how big is Heartland Ranch?
Heartland Ranch is currently a little over 43,000 contiguous acres. So that's one big piece. It's not to say that there aren't a few in-holdings there, but it's all connected, which is pretty cool.
I was on your website yesterday. I think it says it's 66.
We're at about 62,000 acres.
That's everything.
That's everything. That includes other lands that we protect through conservation easement. So one thing to mention in terms of the sort of counterpoint between the type of land trust that Split is versus COL, for example, is Split is kind of a weird land trust because we actually buy most of our land. But what that does is it gives us the flexibility to manage for biodiversity, which is our mandate and our prerogative. So, Judith mentioned we're restoring keystone species, bison, the prairie dog, and beaver. We're trying to restore threatened endangered species like black-footed ferret, stuff like that. But just to have that, I want to mention the importance of contiguity. To have connected areas that are refuges for wildlife is really important. And I'm really proud to be doing that at Split.
Yeah. And that's a great time to talk about how our partnership works together. So your organization buys land to manage it. You donate conservation easements to Colorado Open Lands, and we hold them in perpetuity. So we are in a perpetual business relationship with each other, and both elements are necessary to keep the ground intact for the things that you're trying to preserve. Can you tell me why Split pursues conservation easements on land that they own anyway?
Yes. Conservation easements are a very powerful legal tool for those who are not super aware that allows people to conserve land through a legal mechanism in perpetuity, as you mentioned. So that is in some ways different than public land conservation. It's a different mechanism for conserving land, but nonetheless, it's a very powerful mechanism, and it's one that is employed across North America by land trusts to conserve land. So we, as I mentioned, are a little bit odd because we buy the land. The way that most land trusts operate is they actually work with other landowners who own the land to be able to put an easement on their land. And for us, it's kind of the opposite. So in our case, Colorado Open Lands is our easement holder, as you mentioned. So we work with Colorado Open Lands to develop a strategy for conserving that land. And what's contained in that easement is it's a big document. There's a lot in there. It talks about the conservation values. It talks about management of the property. So we could delve into that a little bit more. But that document is, I think, a very robust tool, the conservation easement deed for conserving land.
And the reason, as I understand it, that Colorado Open Lands doesn't purchase land is because management of land comes with a lot of expense and a lot of risk. And that's so we are happy to be the easement holder and let you all do the hard part. And it's just a great partnership that's worked really well.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good thing to mention, Leslie, is that when you buy land, it's a different ballgame. You're taking into account different considerations. You have to think really hard about the long-term needs and implications of owning that land. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
So for Split to pursue conservation easements, there's also financial benefits for you. Can you delve into that a little bit, please?
Sure. Yeah. So a conservation easement is a legal document that restricts certain activities on a property, such as subdivision of the property, development, etc. And when you put that on the property, it actually devalues the property because you're basically restricting the best uses economically of that land. And in Colorado, we're lucky enough to have a conservation easement tax credit program. And so what you do, or what Split has done to great effect, that has really rapidly accelerated our pace of land acquisition over the past 5 or 6 years, is we essentially buy a property, we put a restrictive conservation easement on the property that generates a tax credit, and then we will sell that tax credit and then use the proceeds of that to pay off the loans on that property and then buy the next property. Has been our strategy.
Excellent. And that's worked very well to your advantage.
It has. Over the past 5 years, we've increased our acreage by more than 20,000 acres. So we have definitely been expanding our footprint for sure.
Excellent. So shifting gears a little bit, what are the threats to our existing shortgrass prairie in Colorado?
Well, I think to provide a little bit of broader context, you can think about the total amount of shortgrass prairie that's left compared to what was originally there. And that number is estimated anywhere between 40 to 50%.
Wow.
So it might not seem like a lot, but when you compare that to tallgrass prairie in Illinois, where there's less than 1% of the original habitat left, it's actually quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it's part of the reason we're so focused on protecting it, because there still is a lot of great habitat left to work with. And so the threats that are currently facing shortgrass prairie are manifold, and they range from things like energy development is one that's big. You know, if you can imagine for prairie wildlife, when there's a large vertical structure on your landscape, that might not necessarily be viewed as good habitat by a prairie species like a lesser prairie chicken, for example. So I think that that's something that we've been taking into account in recent years. It's also impacted, land acquisition and the price of land in our area. I think something to think about in the future is the development of data centers. I think that is coming to the Southern Plains, and I think they're targeting areas. It's pretty dry where we are, so it's hard to know whether or not they'll focus in our area. But I know there's been talks about that, in Pueblo, which is, not that far away from where our land portfolio is. So I think that's another thing to consider moving forward. And, I think the biggest one, and historically the biggest one, has been just conversion to cropland. And so I think that ultimately, about 50% is left, but a large proportion of prairie, which has been arable land, is currently in cropland. And so I think that, from a macro perspective, is something that has resulted in the loss of habitat.
Yeah. And if we lose it, what happens?
I think the bigger picture is what happens when we lose nature, right? And it is extremely important to have balanced ecosystems. If we lose native prairie, we lose carbon storage. There are so many ecosystem services that the prairie provides. Carbon storage, clean water, source populations of animals, deer, birds, you name it. So if we lose shortgrass prairie, it could easily turn into an apocalyptic scene again, such as the Dust Bowl.
I want to back up 1 second, and then we'll come back to the Dust Bowl. You used a phrase that might be unfamiliar to my listeners, and that's ecosystem services. Can you tell us what that means?
Right. Well, those are services provided by nature that humans depend on. There are many categories, but it mostly provides the fact that we have clean water is because of nature's cycle. The fact that we have food is because of pollinators, clean soil, working soils. I have to get the categories. I'll send you a little graph.
Pest control is another big one. So if you have healthy bird populations, they're going to be controlling pests on your crops if you're a farmer, stuff like that. So the list goes on.
A balanced ecosystem is something that humans need in order to provide.
And something that nature, when left to its own devices, provides to us for free, essentially.
Exactly.
Great. And so Dust Bowl. Dun, dun, dun. Let's dig into that. So as I understand it, where your preserves are, we're a hotbed of, I don't know if hotbed is the right, well, maybe it is. Hotspot for
dust bed.
Yeah, right. Talk to me about the history of the Dust Bowl in where your preserves are.
Yeah, so that's exactly where the Dust Bowl was, that part plus more down towards Oklahoma. I've watched a couple of amazing documentaries on the Dust Bowl. I wasn't here during the time. I can recommend one from Ken Burns, for example. But that's exactly where we are. And in the landscape, you can still see the activities that they did to kind of restore the effects from the Dust Bowl. So you see like the ridges that they dug. There's a term for that, right?
I can't remember the operative term, but yeah, essentially what Judith is referring to is that they artificially engineered ridges into the soil to prevent dust from blowing away and to keep, soil in place.
And I think it's an incredible story of hope, because if you see those images of what it looked like and to look at the landscape right now, you see that there was an incredible, large, like a big problem. People figured out what to do to solve it, and they all did it collectively. And that turned the landscape back into something that's functional. And in our case, where Heartland Ranch is, that wasn't even really affected by the Dust Bowl. So that's kind of like still native prairie, what it was like before the Dust Bowl. But I think it's a great image to see how people can tackle a problem and get it fixed.
Yeah. And the problem on the other side was human caused, right? Can you give us like the third grade level explanation of the Dust Bowl?
Yeah, the Dust Bowl was a result of essentially overuse of land by humans. The shortgrass prairie, or the shortgrass prairie prior to 1800 and prior to westward expansion, was had a layer of organic material that built up over the course of millions of years that basically provided incredibly rich substrate for the grass to grow from. And what happened when that westward colonization happened was that farmers came out, there was Homestead Act, they proved up their ground, they came out, they, got their parcel, and they started to farm it. And that went really well for a period of time, especially through this was the period of like 1870 to like the 1920s, basically. And in particular, in the 1920s, it was an incredibly productive time for agriculture. It was a very wet decade. The thing you have to remember about the Great Plains is that what drives the ecology of the Great Plains is precipitation.
Yeah.
And so you can have a dry year, you can have a wet year, you can have a dry decade, you can have a wet decade. And that's exactly what happened in the 1920s. You had a wet decade. And so, people were living high.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden in the 1930s, you had a decade of drought. And that coincided with the plow up, or what was called the Great Plow Up, which was the plow up of tens of millions of acres all the way across the Great Plains, but primarily in the southern plains. And the epicenter of the Dust Bowl was directly where we are in southeast Colorado, around Prowers County, the Panhandle of Oklahoma and Texas, that general area. So what happened was this combination of removing all the topsoil and sod and exposing all this open land, combined with drought conditions, resulted in dust storms that were so powerful that the most famous was Black Sunday, which was April 14th, 1935. And on Black Sunday, a dust storm blew so powerfully that it crossed the Atlantic Ocean and made people in Paris and in London sick.
Wow.
From the amount of dust that was blowing across the ocean and across America. And so that was, basically in the 1930s, people realized like, wow, we have a big problem here. And then there were some really progressive policies of Roosevelt soil conservation districts to really, as Judith said, work as a team to prevent this from happening again in the future.
So I think we've established why prairie conservation is important. Who are the people that are working on it? So there's Split. And then what other partners do you engage, or who's funding it? Help me understand how the pieces fit together.
We operate in the grassland conservation space, and there are a lot of partners who are associated with that and who help us achieve our mission, both from a large scale, structurally across the state of Colorado and the Great Plains, but also particularly at Split. I think from the broad scale, there are a few really important organizations like the Nature Conservancy, which is doing a lot of really cool conservation across the grasslands, especially in the Southern Plains. There are groups like the Central Grasslands Roadmap, which is trying to chart a path forward for the entire ecoregion in the biome of the Great Plains, and working with partners ranging from indigenous partners to producers to the whole gamut, who are doing some really good work. I think specifically at Split, we really rely on Colorado Open Lands as a partner. They hold our easements, and that is essentially makes possible everything that we do in terms of land conservation and the sustainability of our mission. So we're super grateful for that partnership as well.
And our new partner is WWF.
That's true.
The Wildlife Fund. They have a whole Great Plains initiative. Do they call it an initiative? Or
it's called the Great Plains Wildlife Program, I believe.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
We are going to partner with them on a variety of topics.
It's striking me how much is accomplished with so few humans. If Split hadn't been founded 20 odd years ago and had undertaken this initiative, how different that landscape might look. I don't want to be tooting my own horn here as an employee of COL, but private nonprofits get a ton done in the conservation and restoration space. And can you talk a little bit about what it's like being a staff of 4 and managing this huge amount of land?
Yeah, definitely. It's a challenge. We all wear many different hats. We all are like multi-skilled. For example, Henry and I are both ecologists, but I also do the bookkeeping, the administration, social media, donor management. Henry, as an ecologist, is doing land acquisition. So he really had to teach himself how to find an appraiser, how to do the appraisal system, how to...
I never envisioned I'd be reading legal contracts in my professional capacity, but...
Permanent legal contracts.
Indeed. Yeah. So but I will say, we have a really good ecosystem of partners and supporters who facilitate all of our conservation easement work.
So we reach out to a big sphere of people who are supporting us, right? So we've got volunteers who are not just building One Rock dams, but are also helping us read through those legal documents, who give advice on how to do the bookkeeping in a correctly fashion, who just share their expertise and their knowledge with us voluntarily. So we're very grateful for that.
And I also want to acknowledge our board. I think we have a really, really talented board who does a lot of work. I mean, when you have 4 employees, as Judith mentioned, you all have to be kind of a Swiss Army knife. Any given day, you're going to be doing tasks that are wildly different from each other. And so I think that's for me, that's one of the reasons I like the job. I think it's dynamic. I think that it is challenging, and I think it's really rewarding. But I also think that we have a lot of people operating in the background that are not our staff.
Sure.
And I think, as Judith mentioned, there's a couple key categories. I think, we have a couple hundred volunteers. We could not do any large scale land restoration without large groups of volunteers to really lend a helping hand. So that's absolutely critical for us. So putting in a plug for those who want to come out to the land and get your hands dirty. We have really good partners like CPW, Judith mentioned. So all of a lot of our ecological and conservation projects, like black-footed ferret projects, we've been doing a project where we were putting GPS collars on ferrets to figure out what was killing them and how to increase their survival. Partners like CPW bring a lot of that capacity to us, and we couldn't do what we do without them either. So, yeah.
And I want to back up 1 second and just give a shout out to the social media work you have been doing. It's been really great lately, I've noticed, and I meant to tell you offline.
Absolutely.
But anyone can find Southern Plains Land Trust on all the major platforms. Is that right?
Correct.
So we have talked kind of a lot about the kind of nuts and bolts. Tell me about the animals. Who's living there, or what/who is living there and thriving there?
I like the way you put that because we actually call them the residents. We are the people are the visitors and they are the residents. Let's start from small to large.
Perfect.
Yeah. Small, like we've got rainbow scarabs.
Cool.
They're beautiful dung beetles. Super important for the ecosystem. We've got a ton of like frogs, toads, salamanders, which is so surprising to me on such a dry landscape.
Yeah.
That species that need that moisture in their skin are still surviving year round. I'll let Henry do the birds because that's his specialty.
Can you talk about the tarantulas?
Oh, yes. The tarantulas are amazing. I always thought they were called Oklahoma brown, but this tarantula expert who's been doing research at our property preserves, she's calling them Colorado browns now because we have like the largest density of tarantulas in the state.
Cool.
Highest density. Sorry. We have prairie dogs. We've got 4,000 acres of prairie dog colonies. They count them in acres because you don't really know how many individuals are like below ground. We were able to reintroduce 140 black-footed ferrets.
Wow.
Yeah. That's not to say that we currently have 140 individuals, but over the course of 4 years, we were able to introduce them.
North America's most endangered mammal, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's not an insignificant percent of their total population, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that Heartland Ranch is being seen as an important piece of the puzzle for black-footed ferret conservation moving forward, because the key for black-footed ferrets, which are obligate prairie dog predators, i.e. they need prairie dogs to survive. It's like 98% of their diet, supposedly. So if you don't have prairie dogs, you don't have ferrets. And so what you really need for ferrets is large acreages of prairie dogs, which is what we're trying to build.
One of my favorite prairie animals is the pronghorn.
Oh, yes.
When we came to Heartland Ranch for the first time, I saw this group of pronghorn running across the landscape, and it was so majestic. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is really like Africa.
Yeah.
Seeing those groups they're not real antelopes, but that's what people call them. Seeing like the baby pronghorn is so cute. They're so beautiful,
and they're such unique animals because they're the fastest terrestrial animal in North America because they used to have to outrun the American cheetah, which is no longer around. So one of the things that I think is really cool about the Great Plains, and Judith alluded to this, the term Serengeti. There's a famous book by Dan Flores, who I believe coined the term the American Serengeti. But when you go back in time in the areas that we're operating now in Southeast Colorado, you would have found a totally different suite of species 20,000 years ago. There would have been saber-toothed tigers, mastodons, American cheetah, the list goes on. So I think that,
was the sloth, the giant sloth?
There were ground sloths. There were literally 20,000 years ago. And then what happened was when humans migrated across the Bering Strait and colonized the Americas, getting into the weeds here, there was a big megafauna extinction. So all those species went extinct, and what was left, which was the bison and the pronghorn, expanded into that open niche space. But pronghorn can run up to 60 miles an hour because they used to have to outrun American cheetahs. I love that little fact.
I love it too. And listeners, you can't see my face, but I am shocked that it was that recent that we had that totally different suite of species.
There's an island. This is farther north, not the Great Plains, but there's an island off the coast of Alaska where mammoths actually, I think mastodons, persisted up until only a few thousand years ago. It was an isolated population that was not impacted by humans. So they survived the megafaunal extinctions, and they eventually got found and driven extinct. But it was only a few thousand years ago. There were literally mastodons.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And Leslie, what's your favorite prairie animal?
So I don't know if you two know this, but I did have the pleasure of visiting Heartland before either of you started. I think it was 2018. And I mean, I love the bison.
Yeah.
I mean, I met Nellie. Is Nellie still around?
Yes.
Nellie's still
alive.
And yeah, it was just such a special experience to be that close to them. I know they're dangerous and we were in vehicles, but just to be kind of all by yourself, besides the other people in the car, surrounded by them was just amazing and very special.
It is. And it really takes you, it evokes that time when there used to be herds of 30 million bison roaming the Great Plains. It's really a powerful image, and they're such a cool animal. And so I was going to mention the bison as well. We have a conservation herd of 140, 150 so animals. They have Yellowstone genetics, which is important from a genetic perspective. Bison population was driven to below 1,000 individuals in the late 1800s. So they were almost driven extinct. And there was kind of this hodgepodge, motley crew of people. There was Hornaday, who was at the Bronx Zoo. There were private, ranch owners in Montana. Pueblo and Allard herd is a famous herd, but there were these kind of little remnant herds that then constituted the revival of bison. And now there are about, 400 to 500,000 across the Great Plains, but most of those are managed for meat production. They're not managed like conservation herds, which we do, which is just the goal is to remove all the internal fences, let them roam, and let them, live as naturally as they can. And, 43,000 acres seems like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, when you think about all the space they used to have to roam that was unfenced, it's a kind of a drop in the bucket.
Right. And you mentioned, I forget how you phrase it, but Yellowstone genetics. As I understand it, most bison in America have been crossbred, I guess you would say, with cattle, and yours are bison as they used to be.
It's true. So the fancy term for that is called introgression, which means when you have cattle genes going into the bison genome from that interbreeding. And so most bison have some degree of cattle introgression, but it's thought that Yellowstone bison are sort of the most pure. So from a broad landscape scale, bison conservation genetics perspective, our herd is strategically important. And we hope to in the future move towards, being able to transfer animals to other herds, because bison management is a problem. It needs to be addressed. These animals have no native predators, and they grow pretty fast, and they're not and they're pretty robust animals. So eventually, we'd like to serve as a resource for other conservation herds across the Great Plains.
Very cool.
Should I talk about birds a little bit?
Yeah.
So the birds that we have at the Southern Plains Land Trust Preserves are really wonderful. And if you look at bird conservation as a whole in North America and how bird populations have been trending, there was a famous paper that came out about 5 years ago that showed that birds on a whole are declining across North America. In fact, it was estimated that since 1970, so about the last 55 years, 3 billion birds have been lost, which is a large proportion of the entire North American bird population. The threats are manifold: habitat loss, domestic cats, building collisions with windows, the list goes on. But the guild that is declining most rapidly are grassland birds, more than any other guild in North America. So they're a conservation priority. These are species like longspurs, like thick-billed longspur, species that, they breed farther up north, but they'll pass through our area on migration. A lot of species that depend on that prairie dog ecosystem, which used to be so widespread. So you can imagine the birds that depend on those species also have declined as prairie dogs have declined. These are species like the mountain plover. They're thought to be fewer than 20,000 left. Their range is super broken up, and they really do well on prairie dog colonies. So that's an example. Burrowing owl is another great example. the cutest prairie owl, in my biased opinion. And we also have species that we're trying to work on in terms of our land acquisition portfolio. We're trying to buy land right now to protect the lesser prairie chicken. So the lesser prairie chicken is a species of bird that inhabits the Southern Plains. They used to have a range of millions of square miles, and over the time with habitat loss, their range has kind of contracted to be in these four sort of small disjunct populations, one of which is in southeast Colorado, and that's the shortgrass prairie ecoregion. The sand sage prairie ecoregion, I should say. And so in the 80s, there were about 80,000 males, or an estimated 80,000 males in the ecoregion. See if you can guess how many there are today.
I wouldn't know where to start.
How about 80? Minus 1,000. So it's going from around 80,000 to 80 in the past 40 or 50 years. And the reasons for that are a combination of things, habitat loss, overgrazing. So if land is overgrazed, prairie chickens need taller grass and specific species of bunch grasses for their breeding habitat. So if they don't have those, they're gone too. So, we're trying to make progress for prairie chickens and other threatened and endangered species on the plains through our land acquisition as well.
Yeah. I want to jump backwards 1 second. And you said that the mountain plover is really dependent on prairie dog habitat. What's that interplay? They're not eating them.
No, not at all. So when you talk about grassland birds, the operative thing of operative importance is like grass height and and vegetation structure. And so, with prairie dogs, as you know, when they crop grass pretty close to the ground. And so mountain plovers are a bird species that likes short grass, like really short grass. So they do really well. They also will in the non-breeding season spend time on agricultural fields. Like they're pretty broad in their habitat use in the non-breeding season, but in the breeding season, they often like to breed on prairie dog colonies.
Got it.
And so as prairie dogs have declined over time, mountain plovers have also declined drastically.
Great. I feel like this is the first episode where I want to have like an appendix of photos and other things so people can see all these really cool species you're talking about.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any other species you wanted to highlight?
Talk about beaver.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. One of our keystone species is the beaver, because a beaver is an ecosystem engineer. That's what they call it. Because as soon as you have beaver on the land, they are the ones who are restoring the wetlands. They keep the wetlands in check by building their dams, the way that they forage. So we have about 57 miles of streams on our preserve.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
On Heartland alone.
On Heartland alone.
Wow.
But they're not all wet year round. Like some of them are ephemeral. So we want the beaver back on our landscape, and we want the beaver to do well and expand its population so that it can build more dams, create more wetlands. Like from where they are right now, we want them to go upstream. And we do that by creating beaver dam analogs. If you know what that is, it's like you just pretend to make a beaver dam as good as you can as a human.
We covered that extensively in the previous episode, which was with the restoration partners.
Yeah, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
We are replanting native willows and cottonwoods.
Cool.
But it is so incredible to me that the beaver came back to Heartland by itself and just built a dam made out of mud and Russian thistle. It's like, it's been so creative.
The first beaver documented on Heartland was actually in 2024.
Oh.
And so we had never seen beaver on Heartland, and then we found one. And since then, we have 4 different locations on Heartland with beaver activity. And I just want to provide a little bit of history for the listeners here. Beaver used to be a lot more abundant throughout the American West, including in southeast Colorado. And I think that we as humans have been victims of what is often called shifting baseline syndrome, which is this idea that, you know what was passed on to you from the previous generation. You don't know what was going on 5 generations ago or longer. And so with beaver, there's actually a famous term in the beaver literature called the Great Drying, which was as beaver were extirpated from the American West. And by the way, beaver were extirpated. If you look at Bent's Old Fort, which was an epicenter of trade activity and was the hub in southeast Colorado on the Santa Fe Trail, that was located really close to where our preserves are now. Bent's Old Fort was primarily trading in beaver from the early 1830s until about 1840. And by about 1840, beaver in our region in southeast Colorado were completely trapped out because they were really easy to hunt. Like, beaver fur trappers, I mean, it was down to a science. And so they literally hunted them out. And over time, they've been slowly, I think, creeping back in. But it's been amazing to see, at Heartland, that sort of natural expansion. And I think that ultimately, thinking about how do we prepare for, future climate change, and how do we, deal with the drought that we've talked about and prevent another dust bowl from happening. I think beavers are by far our greatest ally in that battle. And by the way, that doesn't only, need to be for ecological reasons. There are also economic reasons to have beaver. When you have beaver, their dams and the water they bring and raising the water table, it can mitigate fire. They're bringing in all of these other ecosystem services, as we talked about earlier, that I think are extremely extremely important. And when you talk about really arid areas like Southeast Colorado and the arid, Southern Plains, I think beaver are probably the most important thing that we can do to prepare ourselves for, the future climate variability that the region will face. But also, experience all of the cascading benefits that beaver bring to an ecosystem.
Yeah. And it speaks to the success of your land management practices that they invited themselves back in. So kudos. Okay. You've been so generous with your time. I just have a couple last things I want to ask. And that is, do you have a favorite memory of something that happened on one of the preserves that you'd like to share? An interaction with an animal, or just a beautiful sight, or a feeling that you get when you're out there?
What comes to mind for me is, so Henry and I moved to Heartland Ranch when we started our jobs while our daughter was like 10 months old. So we were there on our little house in the prairie with our little baby.
Just a side note, I want to interrupt. When we first pulled up to the field house at Heartland, you just drive for ages and ages and ages, and there's nothing. And then I remember we pulled up, and Judith is from Amsterdam, which is a cosmopolitan city. Yeah. And I think there was part of her was like, what have I done in my life? Like, how did I end up here? But as she mentioned, like it grows on you pretty quickly. So I'll let you finish.
I was just going to describe that on the weekends we would go for hikes with our little girl in like a carrier backpack, and we would mostly like trek through the creeks, like the creek beds, stream beds. And then there was always a surprise animal popping up around the corner. It would be like a coyote suddenly emerging, or a flock of scaled quail. There was always these little surprises during our little hikes.
I think that's true. I think that's true of like any ecosystem. And the more time you spend there, the more it, so to speak, reveals its secrets to you. And I think there are plenty of secrets to be revealed on the prairie. So that's why everyone needs to spend more time there. But I would say I have this memory that actually happened at the end of last year in the fall. And I was with a donor, and we were driving around Heartland, and we came to this little cottonwood grove. And so cottonwoods, talking about shifting baselines, are a species that used to be much more abundant along even the smaller drainages and streams of Southeast Colorado. I think there's been a lot of cottonwood removal and deforestation over time. So one of the things we're doing is trying to bring cottonwoods back as part of our riparian restoration. But we walked up this cottonwood grove, and a great horned owl is there. And so the great horned owl flew out, and it was just like this great experience. And then there were thousands of monarch butterflies it was a really windy day, and the monarchs had like found refuge in one of the only places that was a refuge on the sweeping plains, which was this cottonwood grove. And so it was just, I actually have videos of it, but it was such an amazing experience to be there, in the middle of the prairie and just be surrounded by thousands of monarch butterflies.
How cool.
Yeah.
Oh, and you mentioned earlier that you'd like to get more people to visit. If somebody wants to visit Heartland Ranch or one of the other preserves, how can they do that if they want to have these great experiences?
Yeah, we have volunteer weekends. So people help out with a variety of activities. Then there are eco tours with one of our ecotourism partners. They're called Reefs to Rockies, and they do a couple of group trips each year. And then we've got something exciting coming up. We have plans for a birding festival.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, in early May. So that's going to be another opportunity for people to come down, sign up for guided excursions focused on birds, but also like botany and amphibians and reptiles. Yeah, I think those are three great ways for people to come down and kind of explore the landscape.
And they can find those opportunities on your website?
Yes.
Great, which is southernplains.org.
Correct.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is I think that Judith and I both realize the importance of instilling that sense of place in people. And so I think that for us, the more people we can get to come down and experience it. And it doesn't mean that, we're interlopers, right? I think that is the idea of wilderness. It's a place that is for wildlife and animals and plants, and humans can spend time there, but just not stay there permanently. And I think that's a really compelling idea. So I don't think, I think there's a way to have wilderness, but also to share that with people and get them excited about it. And I think that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I mean, we've noticed at Colorado Open Lands, I can produce videos, I can put out photos on our social media. Nothing makes the impact on another human like having their boots on the ground and seeing it in person.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
We had a cat just jump and knock something over. We're pro cat at Colorado Open Lands.
She wants to be involved.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share that I didn't ask?
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the new programs that we're building at Split with regard to both education and outreach, and also biodiversity monitoring and management. So, we have Kyron Andrioni is our conservation director. He's been with us for about 2 years. And over those 2 years, he's been building a whole suite of really cool research projects that are centered on a variety of different species. We're starting to work on rare plants like the Colorado green gentian, a plant that's found in only a handful of counties in southeast Colorado. It's endemic to the state, meaning it's only found in Colorado. And we're starting to monitor that population, looking at ways to expand that population. We are starting to work on trying to understand black-footed ferret survival in the wild and how we can increase that. So all of the science work that we're doing is based on trying to improve outcomes for either our keystone species, which are the beaver, bison, and prairie dog, or those rare, threatened, and endangered species that we're also focused on. I should also mention in the education space, we are starting to build that out. We really want to, as much as we can, get people out and young kids out to the prairie and show them the beauty of what is around. I mean, I think one thing that amazed me when I went to give a talk in Lamar in 2025 was a lot of those kids had never been out to a place like the Southern Plains Land Trust, even though they live in that community. Yeah. It's less than an hour drive away. So I think, I'm really focused on getting local kids out. I think that's really important. And also, the easiest thing, they're close by. And so I think ultimately building on that, but really starting to offer more educational programming. There's not a lot of environmental education going on in Southeast Colorado. So really trying to become a premier player in that space and expand our mission in that way, I think is really important. It's an indirect way. It's not buying land. We're still doing that. But I also think it's really valuable because we will be creating the next generation of conservation stewards to go out and join the frontline, battle against land protection. So
yeah, a phrase that we use a lot at COL is laws don't protect land, people protect land.
Bingo.
Yeah. And Judith, anything you'd like to add? Anything I didn't ask?
Well, let me say this. It's a long drive from Denver down to the preserves. You've been there. You did that. So what we're trying to do is bring the preserves to people's homes in the Front Range and beyond. We've got some amazing videos coming up. They'll be released soon. They're made by Christy Odom, Nikon ambassador. And we're just thinking about ways to really have people see what's out there from their own comfy chair.
Perfect. Well, thank you for producing those. I will be excited to watch them myself.
Thanks for the opportunity to be on here. We are so grateful for COL's partnership and so grateful for the opportunity to spread a little bit of information and knowledge about all the good work we're trying to do in Southeast Colorado.
Thanks, Leslie.
And I thank you both for your time. Yeah. And from Pueblo, Colorado today, this has been Landlines.
I'm Leslie Volker, and this has been Landlines. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast, please reach out to me at lvolkar@coloradoopenlands.org. Thanks for listening.